You plagiarized this entire paper." The words shattered the seminar room's peace like a brick through glass. It was a Tuesday in October. Outside, leaves swirled golden and crimson, catching in the stone corners of Westfield University's ancient quad. But inside, in room 213 of the English department, autumn's gentleness found no echo. Here the air was dense, silent except for the ticking of the old clock above the chalkboard. Aaliyah Jackson, 24, sat at the front. Her hair was twisted neatly, her sweater a deep, thoughtful burgundy. She'd chosen it that morning with care, a power color, her mother always said. Power didn't feel like much protection now. Her heart thumped, but her face was calm, composed, the product of years learning not to let fear or anger show. The accusation, voiced by Professor David Mitchell, all tweed and gray stubble, hung in the air, thick and acrid. No one moved. The students, most no older than Aaliyah, stared at her, at him, at the table scattered with laptops, coffee cups, half-eaten bagels, and the paper at the center of it all. Mitchell's voice was precise, practiced, perfectly pitched to cut through noise and silence alike. "Ms. Jackson, I find it implausible that this paper came from you." His words were clinical, almost bored, but his eyes, cold, blue, evaluating, never left her face. Aaliyah's pulse beat against her collarbone. For a moment, she felt suspended in amber. Everything slowed to a dream. The room became impossibly small. Her classmates, some friends, some rivals, froze in a tableau of awkward surprise. She saw Jamal in the back row, his eyebrows knitted in outrage. She saw Denise, lips pressed white, knuckles clenched around her pen. She'd known, somehow, this moment would come. Maybe not this exact accusation, not this exact day. But ever since her first semester here, ever since her work had started attracting attention, good attention, suspicious attention, she'd felt the eyes on her, measuring, weighing, doubting. But she had never expected it to be so public, so humiliating, so final. Mitchell didn't lower his voice. If anything, he pitched it louder, as if daring anyone to challenge him. "The theoretical sophistication of your paper on Bronte's narrative voice is, frankly, beyond what you have demonstrated in this program so far. It is not only beyond what you have demonstrated, it is beyond what any of my students have produced in my 15 years at Westfield. Can you explain that?" Aaliyah opened her mouth, closed it, and tasted bitterness. In her mind, she replayed every late night, every draft, every line-by-line revision. 6 months of research, sleepless stretches in the archives, cross-referencing letters and fragments, Zoom calls with scholars in Leeds and Manchester, spreadsheets of citations so exhaustive she'd started dreaming in footnotes. She had worked for this. She had sweated and doubted and labored for every idea in that paper. But Mitchell wasn't finished. "You have one chance, Ms. Jackson. Did you write this paper yourself? No outside help? No unattributed sources?" The room held its collective breath. Aaliyah's voice was steady, clear, but soft. "Yes, I wrote every word. I can show my notes, my drafts, my process." "Notes can be forged. Drafts can be fabricated," he snapped. "What matters is the end result, and frankly, I don't believe it." A rustle in the back. Marcus Johnson, usually reserved, leaned forward, his face dark with fury. But before he could speak, Christopher Hayes, mid-40s, white, tie loosened, sleeves rolled to the elbow, chimed in. "It's impressive when it's original," he said, voice smooth, lazy with skepticism. "But let's be honest, community college transfer students don't just become Bronte scholars overnight. You don't see this kind of jump unless there's outside help." A laugh, a short, mean bark from someone at the far end of the table. A sharp intake of breath from Denise. A shifting of bodies, the air electric, uncertain. Rebecca Stevens, the department chair, always the picture of academic poise, leaned against the polished seminar table. "The level of theoretical engagement in your analysis, Ms. Jackson, would be exceptional in a doctoral defense. For a seminar assignment, it's unexpected." The words unexpected, implausible, beyond demonstrated capability, Aaliyah had heard them before. In undergrad, when her thesis on Black spirituals and literary form drew side eyes and comments about parental assistance. In her first grad class, when a visiting professor suggested her writing had the flavor of the published, not the student. Each time, she'd been forced to show more: drafts, library slips, research photos, and timestamps. She'd always convinced them, but each time left a scar. She met Stephen's gaze steady. "I can show you every step of my process." A sharp, dismissive gesture from Mitchell. "Not necessary. I'll be submitting this to the university's academic review board." For a moment, it felt like the bottom fell out of the room. Then, quietly, but not quietly enough, Denise Carter spoke. "This is wrong." Mitchell turned on her as if seeing her for the first time. "Excuse me." Denise's hand shook, but she did not back down. "She's not the problem. The problem is that you can't accept that she's this good." A murmur of agreement from Marcus, from Jamal, from a student at the far end. Latina, shy, almost whispering, "It's not fair." Aaliyah's chest swelled, not with pride, but with gratitude, but also a tight, cold fear. Would they stand with her when it counted, or would they fold, as so many had before? Mitchell's face was unreadable. "Academic integrity is not a matter of opinion, Ms. Carter. It's a matter of evidence, and the evidence points to plagiarism." Aaliyah took a breath that felt like swallowing glass. She turned to her laptop, pulled up her Scrivener project, the one with 6 months of drafts, notes, and audio memos. She slid it toward Mitchell, but he refused to look. "We're not interested in computer files," Christopher Hayes sneered. "Those can be faked. Show us something real." Aaliyah's patience, honed by years of biting her tongue, began to fray. "What would you accept as real, Professor Hayes?" He shrugged, unconcerned. "Originality is as much a matter of voice as of content. And your voice," he said, drawing out the word as if tasting something sour, "just isn't credible here." In the silence that followed, the clock ticked off seconds like drops of water falling in a cave. Outside, wind battered the glass, branches scraping in fitful gusts. Rebecca Stevens, ever the diplomat, tried to cool the moment. "Perhaps we should take a pause. This is a serious accusation and we all want to be fair." "No," said Aaliyah, her voice sharper than she intended. "Let's not pause. Let's finish it now." She opened her bag, pulled out the folder. Her hands, she noticed, were trembling only slightly. Inside, printouts of her drafts, her research correspondence, her citation lists, and, most importantly, the email from the Journal of Victorian Studies. She placed it slowly, carefully at the center of the table. Mitchell eyed it as if it might bite him. "What's this?" "My paper," said Aaliyah, "was accepted for publication last week. The reviewers praised its originality. The journal editor can vouch for every source and every idea. You can call her if you want. She's expecting it." For the first time, uncertainty flickered in Mitchell's expression. Hayes, red-faced, reached for the paper, scanning the letterhead. "So what? Journals make mistakes. Peer review isn't infallible." Aaliyah's mouth twisted in a smile that held no humor. "But apparently, your gut feeling is..." Before he could answer, the door opened. Dr. Patricia Harrison entered, a black woman in her early 50s, tall, silver-streaked hair pulled back, eyes alive with intelligence and weariness. She moved with the gravity of someone used to walking into trouble and fixing it. "I've received a report of academic misconduct," she announced. "Ms. Jackson, I'll need to see your evidence." Mitchell sputtered. "This is irregular. We haven't even..." Harrison held up a hand, silencing him with a gesture. "This is not irregular. It's overdue." Aaliyah handed her the folder. Harrison flipped through it, lips pursed. "This appears comprehensive. Drafts, notes, research correspondence, peer review comments. Is there any evidence to the contrary, Professor Mitchell?" Mitchell opened his mouth, closed it. Harrison turned to the room. "Has anyone here seen Miss Jackson behave dishonestly? Anyone seen her steal, copy, fabricate, or misrepresent?" Silence. Jamal, voice low, said, "She's the most honest scholar I've ever met." Denise, louder now, "She works twice as hard as any of us. She's here before the library opens. She closes the archives. Marcus. You wouldn't ask these questions if she looked different. A ripple of discomfort ran through the faculty. Stevens shifted her weight, eyes darting. Mitchell tried to recover. I simply found the paper's quality unusual. Harrison looked at him hard. Unusual is not a synonym for dishonest, Professor. Aaliyah's mind whirled. She remembered her mother's words. If they doubt you, let your work speak for itself. But keep your receipts. She had. Every draft, every annotation, every query to a Bronte scholar in Yorkshire. She documented it all because she knew, always, there would be a day like this. But none of that lessened the sting. None of it gave her back the dignity lost to this public inquisition. She wanted to scream. She wanted to ask, why does brilliance look impossible on me? But she didn't. Instead, she watched as Harrison methodically, thoroughly reviewed every piece of her evidence. Thank you, Ms. Jackson, Harrison finally said. Professor Mitchell, we will proceed with an official review. Until then, I suggest you refrain from further accusations. Mitchell's face flushed, but he nodded. Aaliyah sat, hands in her lap, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline drained, leaving a chill behind. But there was no triumph, only a cold kind of relief. Around the table, the other students sat in stunned silence. Some avoided her eyes. Others tried to offer furtive, sympathetic smiles. In the back, Jamal and Marcus exchanged a look that said, "This isn't over." As the seminar ended and people began to file out, Denise squeezed Aaliyah's shoulder. "We got you," she whispered. Aaliyah nodded, too tired to answer. She gathered her things, moving slowly, as if the air had thickened around her. Outside the room, the world seemed unchanged. Students laughing in the corridor, sunlight catching dust in the windows, the campus alive with possibility. But something fundamental had shifted. In this room today, Aaliyah Jackson had been asked to prove not just her work, but her right to belong. She'd done it, but she knew deep down it was only the beginning. As Aaliyah made her way down the hallway, her mind buzzed with conflicting emotions, anger, relief, fear, and a strange, cold pride. She found herself replaying every moment of the seminar, every look exchanged, every word spoken and left unsaid. She made her way to the small alcove outside the library where she could catch her breath without being watched. Her phone vibrated, a text from her mother, 3 words, "How did it go?" She didn't answer, not yet. She wasn't ready to put the experience into words. Her friends found her there. Denise, Marcus, and Jamal formed a protective circle, shielding her from the curious eyes of passing students. Denise spoke first, her voice urgent but soft. "You shouldn't have had to do that, not after all the work you put in." Aaliyah shook her head, trying to smile. "I knew they'd come for me sooner or later. I just hoped," she broke off, not wanting to finish the thought. Jamal leaned against the wall, arms folded. "They picked the wrong one today. You didn't flinch, Aaliyah. You made them look at themselves. I wish I had that kind of strength." Marcus's voice was quiet but full of conviction. "You did more than stand up for yourself. You stood up for everyone who's ever been told they're unexpected." They stayed like that, huddled in the hallway, until the bells chimed for the next class. Denise reached out, squeezing Aaliyah's hand. "Whatever happens next, we're with you, all the way." Aaliyah managed a real smile this time, even as her stomach twisted with anxiety about the official review, about what stories Mitchell and Hayes would spin behind closed doors. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "Let's see if they're ready for us." The group broke up, each heading to their next class or office, but a quiet strength bound them together, a promise, unspoken but understood. As Aaliyah walked toward the library, students glanced at her, some whispering, some offering nods of respect, others pretending not to see. Word of the confrontation was already spreading, faster than rumor could travel in any email or text. By the time she reached the 3rd floor, she heard her own name, Aaliyah Jackson, spoken in hushed tones by 2 undergrads she'd never met. "She's the one who got accused in Mitchell's class." "No way, she's like brilliant. Didn't she win that fellowship last year?" "Yeah, but you know how it is. Some people don't want us to win." Aaliyah felt a rush of both pride and dread. She settled into her usual study carrel, opened her laptop, and forced herself to work. If she let them see her shaken, they'd win. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. But focus was impossible. The words on her screen blurred and swam. She closed her eyes, replaying every moment, every face. She thought of Professor Mitchell, so sure in his authority, of Hayes, whose sneers had stung more than she wanted to admit, of Stevens, whose cool detachment was almost as cutting as open hostility. She remembered, too, Dr. Harrison's voice, calm, commanding, a lifeline in the storm. This is not irregular. It's overdue. In that moment, Aaliyah had felt seen, not just as a student under suspicion, but as a scholar worth defending. She opened her email. Already there was a message from Dr. Harrison. Subject: official review process, next steps. Aaliyah, thank you for your composure and thorough documentation today. I will be convening a formal review panel tomorrow morning. You will have the opportunity to present your process in full. If you need anything, counsel, support, advocacy, let me know. You are not alone. Best, Dr. Patricia Harrison, Vice Provost for Academic Affairs. Aaliyah exhaled, relief mingled with apprehension. The battle had only just begun. Aaliyah spent the afternoon in a restless fog, eyes flitting between her laptop screen and the small window that looked out over the quad. Sunlight moved slowly across the stone, painting shadows of the oaks onto the courtyard. She could see students gathered on benches, some huddled in animated conversation, others staring at their phones. She wondered if any of them were talking about her. She wondered if the world would ever let her just be a student, not a symbol, not a target. The messages started to come in. At first, they were from her closest friends, fellow grad students who had heard about the confrontation, some who'd been in the room, others who'd caught snippets in the hallway. Aaliyah, I'm so sorry. Let me know if you need anything. He had no right to do that. We stand with you. Don't let them shake you. You've earned your spot. Each message brought a swell of gratitude and a knot of anxiety. How many times could she accept support for fighting the same battle? How many times would she have to prove her right to belong? But soon, messages from strangers appeared in her inbox. Undergrads she'd never taught. A first-year transfer from Georgia who wrote, "He tried the same thing with me last year. I'm rooting for you." An alumna from the class of 2015, now teaching in Baltimore, who confessed, "I left this department because of accusations like that. I wish I'd fought back." The support was real, but so was the weight. Aaliyah found herself representing more than herself now. She was a stand-in for every student whose work had ever been doubted, whose ideas were met with suspicion, whose excellence was labeled implausible. She needed a break. She left her carrel and walked the length of the library, passing shelves heavy with books, Dickens, Bronte, Morrison, Baldwin, all the writers who had taught her that stories mattered, that truth mattered, that pushing through the world's disbelief was itself an act of scholarship. Outside, the wind was brisk. She zipped her jacket and crossed the quad, heading for the little coffee shop across from the Humanities building. The familiar chime of the bell over the door was a comfort. She ordered a chai, hands still shaking faintly, and found a seat in the far corner. The place was busy with faculty and students, the air scented with espresso and cinnamon. At a nearby table, two English majors debated whether Eliot or Woolf was more radical. At the counter, a TA from political science typed furiously on her phone. Even in this ordinary bustle, Aaliyah felt apart, marked, as if she wore a sign announcing what had happened. She pulled out her phone, one unread message from her mother. She hesitated, then tapped call. Her mother picked up on the second ring, her voice warm and steady. "Hey, baby, you all right?" Aaliyah closed her eyes, letting the familiarity wash over her. "It happened, Mom. The thing I always worried about. In front of everyone." She heard her mother sigh. "I'm so sorry, Aaliyah, but listen. You know who you are. You know what you did. They can't take that from you. When you were 8 and the teacher said you copied your essay from a book, what did we do?" Aaliyah smiled a little, despite everything. "You told her to check the library. The essay wasn't there. It was all mine. That's right, her mother said. And when they doubted you again, you proved them wrong. This is bigger, but you're stronger now. You've been preparing for this your whole life. Aaliyah nodded, her chest tight. It just hurts. It shouldn't have to be this hard. No, it shouldn't, her mother said. But you keep your head high. You lean on your people, and you keep your receipts, just like always. After they hung up, Aaliyah stared at her reflection in the coffee shop window. She didn't see a fraud or a victim. She saw someone tired, yes, but also determined. Someone who would not be moved. She texted Denise, "You around?" And 5 minutes later, her friend slid into the seat across from her, still in seminar clothes, her energy vibrating with indignation. "He's an ass," Denise said by way of greeting. "They all are. I heard Rebecca Stevens already called an emergency faculty meeting. Damage control, I guess." Aaliyah rolled her eyes. "Of course, the department can't look bad. That's more important than anything." Denise leaned in. "Jamal's ready to go public, you know. He wants to write an open letter to the student newspaper. Marcus is talking about getting the Black Graduate Student Association involved." The thought gave Aaliyah pause. "I don't want to turn this into a circus." "You didn't," Denise said quietly. "They did. You just survived it. And you did it with so much class. The room was with you, Aaliyah. Even the ones who said nothing." Aaliyah remembered the silence, remembered the look in Marcus's eyes, the crack in Hayes' voice when he realized the vice provost had entered, remembered how small for a moment Mitchell had seemed, stripped of his power by the simple presence of evidence. "What if it's not enough?" she asked. "What if they find some way to turn it around?" Denise reached across the table, squeezed her hand. "Then we fight harder. You don't have to do it alone. Not anymore." Aaliyah nodded, feeling a little of the weight lift. She remembered her mother's words, "Lean on your people." Back at her apartment that evening, she replayed the day in her head, again and again. Every detail, the curve of Mitchell's mouth as he spoke, the way Hayes scrawled that question mark, the silence of the students who didn't know what to say. She wrote it all down in her journal, every word, every feeling, every trembling moment. She called her mentor from undergrad, Dr. Regina Howard, who listened quietly as Aaliyah recounted the events. "You handled it," Dr. Howard said, her voice proud and fierce. "You didn't let them see you sweat, and you had your evidence ready. That's what makes you dangerous to them, Aaliyah. You don't fit the script." "But what now?" Aaliyah asked. "What if they keep coming?" Dr. Howard was silent for a moment. "Then you do what you've always done. You keep working. You keep building your case. You let your work speak, but you don't let them steal your voice. This is your story now. Own it." Later, lying in bed, Aaliyah stared at the ceiling. She remembered the first time a teacher accused her of cheating back in the 6th grade. She'd written a poem that made her teacher cry, and the next day, her mother had to come to school and fight for her. The pattern had followed her: high school, college, now graduate school. Excellence was always called suspicious. Her confidence was always called arrogance. Her success was always called lucky. But tonight she felt something else, a current of resolve. She would go to the review. She would show every draft, every email, every note. She would force them to see her not as an anomaly, but as a scholar. She would not apologize for being brilliant. Before she drifted off to sleep, she set her alarm and checked her email one more time. Another message from Dr. Harrison confirming the time of the review. Another message from a Black alum. "Thank you for standing up. You made it a little easier for those who come after." She saved that one, tucked it into a folder labeled Strength. The next morning, the university buzzed with talk. The English department faculty, forced to confront their own process, gathered behind closed doors. In group chats and online forums, students dissected every detail. Was it really about plagiarism, or was it about power, about whose voices were welcomed and whose were not? Mitchell, for his part, spent the morning in his office drafting emails to the dean, trying to justify his suspicion. He framed it as a duty to uphold standards, to protect the department's reputation. But a trace of uncertainty crept in. What if he'd overreached? What if the real damage was to his own authority? Rebecca Stevens called Jamal and Marcus in for a private conversation, urging them not to inflame the situation with public protest. Jamal bristled. "This isn't about one student. It's about all of us. If you're so confident in your process, you shouldn't be afraid of scrutiny." By noon, the campus newspaper had sent a reporter to the English building, asking pointed questions about fairness and accountability. The Black Graduate Student Association posted a statement of solidarity on social media, which was quickly shared across departments. The story was out, and it could not be pulled back. That afternoon, Aaliyah dressed carefully. She wore her mother's gold necklace, a quiet talisman, and the same burgundy sweater, a reminder that her strength did not come from them, but from herself, from her family, from everyone who had poured belief into her. She walked to the administration building with her evidence in a folder, her head high. Students in the hallway nodded as she passed, a few whispering words of encouragement. She saw Denise waiting outside the provost's office, eyes shining with pride and anger. "You ready?" Denise asked. Aaliyah nodded. "I've been ready my whole life." As she entered the review room, she took a deep breath. Dr. Harrison sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 faculty from outside the department and an administrator from student conduct. Mitchell was there, pale, tight-lipped, his hands folded on the table. Hayes was nowhere to be seen. Dr. Harrison spoke first. "Ms. Jackson, thank you for coming. We're here to address the accusation of academic misconduct brought forward by Professor Mitchell. You'll have the opportunity to present your evidence and respond to any questions. This process is being recorded and will be reviewed by the Office of Academic Integrity." Aaliyah placed her folder on the table and began. She showed her research notes, her drafts, her annotated bibliographies, her correspondence with Bronte scholars overseas. She read aloud the email from the Journal of Victorian Studies, the peer review comments praising her original analysis. She answered every question, calmly, factually, without apology. Mitchell tried to poke holes, suggested she'd had outside help, that the paper's voice didn't sound like her earlier work. Aaliyah countered with her process, the iterative drafts, the annotated feedback, the email threads with her mentors. She even brought up her earlier papers, showing her growth as a scholar, the progression from promising to exceptional. At the end, Dr. Harrison looked around the table. "Any further questions?" No one spoke. She nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Jackson. We will notify you of the committee's findings within 48 hours. You may return to your classes." Aaliyah gathered her things, thanked the committee, and walked out. Denise was waiting in the hall, holding out her hand. "How'd it go?" Aaliyah managed a smile. "I did my best. The rest is on them." As they walked across campus, the sun dipped low, lighting the quad in gold. Students crossed their paths, some nodding, some whispering, some offering silent support. The day felt lighter somehow, as if a burden had been shared. In her heart, Aaliyah knew the outcome was still uncertain, but she had defended her work, her integrity, her right to belong. Whatever came next, she was not alone. And that, for the first time in a long while, felt like enough. Before the accusation in room 213, before the suspicious glances, the angry text messages, and the solidarity statements, there was a different Aaliyah Jackson, a girl who learned early that excellence in the wrong eyes could be a liability. Her journey to the seminar room did not begin at Westfield University, nor with her first research prize or published article. It began on the sun-bleached streets of North Philly, in a brick row house where ambition was a kind of inheritance and doubt a familiar ghost. Aaliyah's earliest memories were of her mother's hands, broad, strong, and never still. Her mother, Sheila, had worked as a nurse, sometimes pulling double shifts, always making time for Aaliyah's bedtime stories. She read aloud from tattered library books, her voice rising and falling with the drama of each tale. "Words are power, baby," she would say, brushing Aaliyah's curls from her face. "Never let anyone tell you yours don't matter." School in those early years was a place of wonder. Aaliyah devoured stories, fairy tales, history books, poems, her mind hungry for all of it. In second grade, her teacher caught her reading under the desk and sent a note home. Aaliyah daydreams too much. She needs to focus on the assignment. Her mother read the note and laughed, telling Aaliyah, "Don't ever stop dreaming. Some people just can't see where dreams lead." It wasn't until fourth grade that Aaliyah first learned the cost of standing out. She wrote a poem for the city's MLK Day contest, a winding, honest piece about hope, fear, and what it meant to be seen and not seen. Her teacher, Ms. Fenwick, called her mother in for a meeting. "This is too advanced for her age," she said, sliding the poem across the desk. "Are you sure she wrote this?" Sheila's answer was instant. "My daughter writes every day. You think I have time to write poems for her?" She stared the teacher down, daring her to challenge Aaliyah's brilliance. After that, something shifted in Aaliyah. She realized her gifts could make people uncomfortable. She started writing in secret, hiding her journals under the bed. The joy of discovery became tinged with caution. Every A, every blue ribbon brought pride, but also suspicion. Middle school brought new challenges. Her world expanded, new friends, new teachers, new tests of belonging. In seventh grade, a social studies teacher accused her of copying an essay on Harriet Tubman. "No middle schooler writes like this," he insisted. The school threatened disciplinary action until Aaliyah produced her drafts, her research notes, her stack of library checkout slips. The teacher muttered an apology, but never looked her in the eye again. Aaliyah learned slowly to armor herself with evidence. She never turned in a paper without multiple drafts, always kept her sources, annotated every page. She learned to anticipate every doubt, every "are you sure?" and "did you do this alone?" It was exhausting, but necessary. At home, her mother was her refuge and her rock. Sheila pushed her to dream bigger, to imagine herself in college, to reach beyond what anyone expected. Money was tight some nights. Dinner was ramen and eggs, but there was always enough for books. On weekends, they rode the bus downtown to the main library where Aaliyah would lose herself in the stacks while her mother napped in a chair by the window. High school was both a proving ground and a minefield. Aaliyah gravitated toward English and history, gravitating toward teachers who nurtured her ambition. She joined the debate team, discovering she loved the rush of argument, the thrill of defending her ideas before a skeptical audience. She won the citywide essay contest 2 years in a row, catching the eye of Mrs. Garcia, her AP literature teacher, who became an early mentor. But suspicion still dogged her. A guidance counselor, reviewing her college essays, asked pointedly, "Are you sure you wrote these yourself?" When she applied for the state scholars program, the interviewer grilled her on every detail. "Your recommendations are excellent, your scores are high, but this essay stands out. Who helped you with it?" Aaliyah smiled, handed over her annotated drafts, and left the room feeling both vindicated and weary. Despite her stellar academic record, the money for a private college was never there. Even with scholarships, the gap was too wide. So Aaliyah chose community college, Baldwin Community College, a decision that carried its own set of judgments. The transition was not easy. Friends left for four-year universities, some never looking back. Family members wondered aloud if she was settling. Aaliyah pushed past the disappointment, focused on her goal, transfer with honors, save money, and prove to herself and the world that her path was no less worthy. Baldwin became a crucible. The classes were small, the professors overworked, the students diverse and driven. Aaliyah found a community, people who, like her, balanced work and school, who knew what it was to hustle. She took a job at the library, shelving books at night and reading between shifts. She found her voice in the campus literary magazine, where she became editor in her second year. Her English professor, Dr. Evelyn Baker, saw her potential. She pushed Aaliyah to apply for research fellowships, connected her to alumni, and nominated her for the state's prestigious undergraduate research symposium. When Aaliyah's paper on gender and power in early American literature was selected, Dr. Baker celebrated with her. "You did this, Aaliyah. Don't let anyone take it away." The symposium changed everything. Representatives from universities across the state attended. Among them was Dr. Regina Howard, an English professor from Westfield University, who sat in the front row as Aaliyah presented her work. Afterward, Dr. Howard introduced herself. "You have a future in scholarship," she said. "I'd be honored to write your transfer recommendation." With Dr. Howard's support, Aaliyah applied to Westfield. She wrote her transfer essay late at night, after work, editing drafts on her phone in the back of the bus. She was accepted with honors, awarded a scholarship for first-generation students, and moved into a cramped dorm room the following fall. Westfield was a different world. The campus was sprawling, the buildings historic, the student body privileged and mostly white. Aaliyah felt the difference everywhere, in the way her classmates dressed, the vacations they took, and the confidence with which they spoke in class. She quickly realized that being brilliant here was a double-edged sword. Excellence made her visible, but also marked her as an outsider. The department was a place of tradition and hierarchy, professors who wore their Ivy League credentials like medals, students who never had to explain why they belonged. Aaliyah, the transfer, the Baldwin girl, was easy to overlook or, worse, to challenge. Her first semester was brutal. She struggled with imposter syndrome, doubting every answer, every paragraph. She overprepared, reading double the assigned texts, memorizing every citation. She volunteered for every discussion, determined to prove herself. But still she felt the skepticism, the questions that hovered just behind polite smiles. Who let her in? How long would she last? There were small kindnesses, too. Dr. Howard checked in regularly, inviting her for coffee, reminding her that she deserved to be there. "Don't shrink yourself," she would say. "You are here because you belong. Your voice matters." Aaliyah poured herself into her studies. She found solace in the archives, losing hours to the feel of old paper and the scent of dust and ink. She became a fixture in the library, befriending the night security guard who brought her tea during marathon study sessions. In her junior year, she took Professor David Mitchell's Victorian Women Writers. The syllabus was rigorous, the reading list vast, the expectations sky-high. Mitchell was renowned in his field, his classes legendary for their difficulty and their drama. He was the kind of professor who quoted Foucault in casual conversation, who challenged students to defend every argument, who had little patience for what he called sloppy thinking. He also had a reputation for being a gatekeeper, tough but fair, some said. But others, usually students of color and transfers, called him something else: intimidating, dismissive, sometimes cruel. Aaliyah excelled in his class at first. Her essays drew praise, though always laced with backhanded compliments. "Surprisingly strong analysis for a junior," he once wrote in the margin. "Unexpectedly sophisticated." She felt the chill in those words, the skepticism, but told herself it didn't matter. The grades were what counted. But there were moments, tiny, sharp, that revealed something deeper. Once, during a discussion on Jane Eyre, Aaliyah challenged Mitchell's reading of Bertha Mason as merely a plot device. She argued for Bertha as a character in her own right, shaped by the colonial anxieties of her time. Mitchell listened, then countered sharply. "Interesting theory, Ms. Jackson, but not quite supported by the text. Perhaps in a graduate seminar you'd develop those ideas more fully." The class laughed, and Aaliyah felt herself shrink. She noticed, too, that her classmates, especially the legacy students, were never questioned so fiercely. Their ideas were entertained, debated, given the benefit of the doubt. Hers were tested, prodded, sometimes dismissed. Still, Aaliyah persisted. She wrote papers that pushed boundaries, that linked Victorian narratives to contemporary issues of race and gender. She earned invitations to present at regional conferences. Her professors, most but not all, began to recognize her brilliance. But suspicion lingered. A classmate, overheard in the library, said, "She must have a ghostwriter." Another, "Maybe her old professor helps her." The rumors stung, but Aaliyah buried herself in the work, determined to let her scholarship drown out the doubts. By senior year, she had built a solid reputation. She published her first article in an undergraduate journal. She was accepted to the honors program where her thesis, a study of narrative fragmentation in the works of Wilkie Collins, won a university prize. When it came time to apply to graduate school, Dr. Howard and Dr. Baker both encouraged her to stay at Westfield. "You've built your home here," they said. "Don't let them push you out." She applied, was accepted, and began her doctoral studies in English, specializing in 19th century literature. She was, as far as anyone could tell, the first black woman to do so in the department's history. Graduate school was another crucible. The courses were harder, the stakes higher, the faculty more imposing. The microaggressions became more insidious, subtle digs about her unusual perspective, questions about her background, polite curiosity about her family support. She learned to smile, to answer with poise, to deflect with wit. She kept her receipts always. The department, for all its reputation, was rife with politics. The senior faculty, Mitchell, Stevens, Hayes, held tight to tradition. New ideas, especially those challenging the canon or interrogating issues of race and gender, were often met with resistance. Aaliyah found allies in Dr. Chen, a comparative literature professor whose own experiences as an outsider shaped his pedagogy, and in Denise Carter, a fellow doctoral student and fierce advocate for equity. Outside the classroom, Aaliyah joined the Black Graduate Student Association, helping organize workshops and support groups for students of color. She mentored undergrads, taught a seminar on Black women writers, and led a successful campaign for more inclusive course offerings. Still, she felt the weight of being the first, the representative, the exception, the one whose mistakes would be remembered, whose triumphs would be scrutinized. She pushed herself to be perfect, fearing that one misstep would confirm every unspoken suspicion. Her research flourished. She developed an obsession with narrative voice, how writers shaped, fractured, and remade stories to include the marginalized, the silenced. She wrote paper after paper, each building on the last, each more daring in its claims. The department watched, some with admiration, some with envy, some with suspicion. The summer before the seminar incident, Aaliyah secured a fellowship to study Victorian manuscripts in London. She spent weeks in archives, poring over letters and drafts, corresponding with scholars, filling notebooks with observations. She returned home exhausted but exhilarated, certain she was onto something big, a new reading of Charlotte Bronte's unpublished fragments, a theory about voice and identity that she couldn't wait to develop. The fall semester began, and with it, Professor Mitchell's graduate seminar, Narrative Authority in Victorian Literature. It was the kind of class that could make or break reputations. The reading list was punishing, the expectations immense. From the start, Mitchell singled out Aaliyah's contributions. He questioned her ideas more aggressively than others, asked for more citations, more proof, more justification. He praised her work in class, but in office hours expressed doubt about her leaps of logic. Still, Aaliyah pushed forward. She spent months developing her paper on Bronte, drawing on everything she'd learned, her archival research, her conversations with British scholars, her own experience of being doubted and dismissed. She wrote draft after draft, refining her argument, sharpening her prose, determined to create something original, something undeniable. She submitted the paper early, sharing a draft with Dr. Howard and Dr. Baker, who both offered feedback and encouragement. She submitted it, too, to the Journal of Victorian Studies, hoping, if not expecting, that it might be published. And then, 2 weeks before the seminar confrontation, she received the email, "Dear Ms. Jackson, we are pleased to inform you that your paper, Voices Unbound, Fragmentation and Authority in the Unpublished Works of Charlotte Brontë has been accepted for publication as the lead article in our winter issue. The reviewers were unanimous in their praise for the originality, rigor, and sophistication of your analysis. We look forward to working with you on final edits and hope you will consider submitting future work. Aaliyah was ecstatic, but wary. She knew how this could look. Too much, too soon, too good to be true. She kept the email, printed the acceptance, added it to her growing folder of receipts. In the weeks leading up to the seminar incident, whispers spread through the department. Aaliyah heard them, faint but unmistakable. She can't be this good. Someone's helping her. Maybe the journal made a mistake. She ignored them mostly. She had work to do. And then, the morning of the confrontation, she received an email from Mitchell, asking her to bring her paper and supporting materials to the seminar. She sensed what was coming. She packed her drafts, her notes, the acceptance letter, her annotated bibliography. She texted her mother, "Big day, wish me luck." When she entered room 213 that afternoon, she felt the weight of history, her own, her family's, the department's, settle on her shoulders. She sat in the front, chin lifted, hands steady, heart racing. The rest, the accusation, the suspicion, the refusal to look at her evidence, was a script she knew by heart. But this time she was ready. She had come too far, worked too hard, sacrificed too much to back down now. She would not apologize for her brilliance. Not now, not ever. In the immediate aftermath of the seminar, the world around Aaliyah Jackson seemed to contract and expand in dizzying waves. She felt at once exposed, as if every student on campus was peering into her soul, and deeply isolated, as if she were encased in glass, her real self visible but untouchable. For the rest of that afternoon, she kept to the quieter corridors of the library, afraid that if she ventured too far, she would unravel, publicly, irreparably. By the time she returned to her apartment that evening, the familiar comfort of her small living room felt both welcoming and confining. She tossed her bag onto the faded blue sofa, collapsed beside it, and stared at the ceiling. For a few minutes, she simply breathed. It was as if she'd been holding her breath all day, waiting for the blow to land. The first thing she did was organize her materials. She spread them across the coffee table, drafts, annotated bibliographies, research notes, printouts of emails from the Brontë archives, even receipts for the books she'd ordered during her London fellowship. It was a ritual, almost sacred, one she'd repeated so many times before, making her case not just to herself but to the invisible audience she always suspected would one day demand proof. She reviewed the email from the Journal of Victorian Studies, reading and rereading the reviewer's comments. Ms. Jackson's analysis of fragmentation in Bronté's unpublished works is truly original. Her research demonstrates a level of depth rarely seen at this stage. We believe this article will be an important contribution to Victorian studies. She pressed the printout to her chest, grateful for the validation. Yet even now she felt a pang of resentment. Why did she need this much evidence? Why, after all her work, did the burden remain so heavy? She spent the evening preparing for the review, assembling a timeline of her research process. She listed every step, from her initial idea to her correspondence with scholars in the UK, every draft, every peer review. She gathered screenshots, time-stamped documents, and even her notes app, where the very first seeds of the paper had taken root. Her phone buzzed with messages, encouragement from friends and mentors, questions from classmates, a terse, impersonal note from Professor Mitchell confirming the time of the formal review. It struck her as strange that someone who'd so publicly doubted her had nothing more to say now. No apology, no acknowledgement of the damage. At midnight, unable to sleep, she called her mother. "They'll try to twist it," her mother warned gently. "Don't give them the chance. Show them everything. Make them look you in the eye," Aaliyah promised she would. The next day dawned gray and cold. She arrived at the administration building early, settling on a bench outside the provost's office, evidence-laden folder clutched to her chest. She watched professors file in, their expressions unreadable, some greeting her with cautious nods, others ignoring her entirely. Denise arrived soon after, sitting close, their shoulders almost touching in solidarity. "You ready?" Denise asked quietly. "Ready as I'll ever be," Aaliyah replied, trying to sound braver than she felt. The review panel convened in a formal conference room. The table was long, the lighting clinical. At the head sat Dr. Patricia Harrison, calm and authoritative, flanked by two senior faculty from outside the department and the representative from the Office of Student Conduct. Mitchell was there, face impassive, hands folded on the table. Beside him was Rebecca Stevens, who looked everywhere but at Aaliyah. After a brief introduction, Dr. Harrison gestured for Aaliyah to begin. Aaliyah stood, hands trembling, and began her presentation. She started with her earliest drafts, projecting them on the room's monitor, showing the evolution of her thesis statement, the way her ideas had shifted with each new source. She walked the panel through her process, highlighting the weeks spent in the London archives, the correspondence with the Bronte scholars who had answered her questions about obscure manuscripts, the way each new discovery fed into her evolving analysis. She displayed her annotated bibliographies, the notes in the margins, the questions she'd written to herself late at night. How does Bronte's personal history complicate her narrative choices? What can we learn from the fragments? She produced her peer review feedback, the email from Dr. Margaret Windsor, editor of the Journal of Victorian Studies, confirming the paper's acceptance and praising its originality. Throughout, Dr. Harrison listened carefully, asking clarifying questions. The faculty from outside the department seemed genuinely impressed, occasionally nodding, sometimes scribbling notes. Mitchell, for his part, could not conceal his growing discomfort. He tried, more than once, to interrupt. "But surely you had help with the archival research. Did someone at the archive guide your interpretation?" But Aaliyah fielded each question calmly, referencing email threads, receipts, and footnotes. At one point, Stevens interjected, "We're not questioning your work ethic, Ms. Jackson, only the likelihood that this paper could be so advanced at this stage in your career." Aaliyah locked eyes with her. "With respect, Dr. Stevens, likelihood isn't the standard for academic misconduct. The evidence is here. I can explain every step, every source, every idea. If you doubt my process, I'm happy to walk you through it again." A flicker of something, embarrassment perhaps, or regret crossed Stevens's face, but she said nothing more. The review lasted nearly 2 hours. At the end, Dr. Harrison thanked Aaliyah for her thoroughness, assuring her that a decision would be made as soon as possible. As Aaliyah gathered her papers, Mitchell cleared his throat. "I only wanted to ensure the integrity of the department," he offered weakly. Aaliyah met his gaze. "Integrity includes the willingness to admit when you're wrong, Professor." Denise, waiting in the hall, threw her arms around Aaliyah as she emerged. "You killed it," she whispered. "They have nothing. You showed them." But the wait for the panel's decision was excruciating. For 2 days, Aaliyah was a ghost in her own life, going to classes, attending meetings, answering emails, but always with half her mind replaying the review. She worried about the future, about whether any of this would matter, about whether the faculty's doubts would follow her, even if she was cleared. During those days, the campus simmered. The story of the seminar incident, already circulating among students, spread to faculty and administrators. The Black Graduate Student Association released a statement condemning the department's treatment of Aaliyah and calling for a review of all recent plagiarism cases. The campus paper ran an editorial, "Academic Gatekeeping, Who Gets to Be Brilliant at Westfield?" Social media buzzed with hashtags, "Let her speak," "Scholar not suspect," "Evidence over ego." Aaliyah avoided most of it, but she couldn't escape the feeling that her private struggle had become a public symbol. She wondered if she would ever be allowed to be just herself, not an example, not a case study. She leaned on her support network, her mother, Denise, Jamal, Marcus, Dr. Howard. They sent her reminders of her worth, practical tips for self-care, even jokes to lighten the mood. Dr. Howard emailed, "Remember, they don't get to define you, only you do." Jamal brought her homemade soup. Marcus offered to walk her to class, a silent shield against stares. Late at night, Aaliyah wrote in her journal, pouring her anger, her fear, her determination onto the page. "They want me to be grateful just to be here, but I won't be grateful for crumbs. I want the whole table." On the morning the decision was due, she woke early and walked the campus, breathing in the cold air, watching the sun rise over the stone buildings. She saw students heading to class, laughing, arguing, oblivious to the storm in her world. She wondered what she would do if the verdict went against her. Would she fight? Would she leave? Her phone buzzed. An email from Dr. Harrison. Subject: Review Panel Decision. Dear Ms. Jackson, the review panel has unanimously found no evidence of academic misconduct. Your documentation was exemplary. We regret the distress caused by this process and commend your professionalism and scholarship. The university will issue a public statement exonerating you and reaffirming our commitment to fair and equitable academic review. Aaliyah sat down on a bench, her whole body shaking. Relief flooded her, fierce and overwhelming. She forwarded the email to her mother, to Denise, to Dr. Howard, and closed her eyes, letting the tension drain away. But even in her relief, she felt anger simmering. She had been forced to defend her work not because it was lacking, but because it was excellent. She had lost time, sleep, and peace of mind. Her reputation had been questioned before the facts were reviewed, and she was not alone. Other students, other scholars, had faced the same skepticism, the same trials by fire. That afternoon, the university issued a statement. After a thorough investigation, the Office of Academic Affairs has found no evidence of plagiarism or misconduct in the work of Ms. Aaliyah Jackson. We commend her scholarship and resilience, and we reaffirm our commitment to supporting all students equitably. It was a victory, but a bittersweet one. In the days that followed, Aaliyah was approached by students, black, brown, white, queer, immigrant, who thanked her for standing up, who shared their own stories of doubt and disbelief, who asked for her advice. She became almost overnight a leader, a reluctant one, but a leader nonetheless. The department, for its part, retreated into silence. Mitchell was rarely seen outside his office. Stevens avoided her gaze. Hayes, who had started the incident with sneers and dismissals, sent her a terse apology via email. "If I contributed to your distress, I regret it. Academic integrity is complex." She deleted it without reply. Dr. Harrison, however, sought her out. They met in her office, surrounded by books and sunlight. "You didn't just defend yourself," she told Aaliyah. "You started a conversation this place desperately needed. What do you want to see change?" Aaliyah hesitated, then found her voice. "I want a review of the department's practices. I want transparency in how accusations are handled. I want mentorship for students from underrepresented backgrounds, real mentorship, not just checking a box." Dr. Harrison nodded. "Let's make it happen." The following week, a task force was formed. Aaliyah, Denise, and Jamal were invited to serve, along with faculty allies and university administrators. Their mandate: examine the department's climate, review recent cases, propose reforms. The work was slow, sometimes frustrating, but also invigorating. They pored over data: who was accused, who was exonerated, whose work was celebrated, and whose was doubted. They held listening sessions for students, where stories poured out, tales of silent suffering, resilience, and hope. Through it all, Aaliyah kept up with her own research. The Journal of Victorian Studies published her article, featuring it on the cover. Dr. Margaret Windsor, the editor, wrote to congratulate her personally, inviting her to present at the journal's annual conference in London. The article sparked new conversations in the field, drawing praise from scholars around the world. But Aliyah knew her most important work was happening at home. In meetings, she challenged faculty to examine their biases, to consider the impact of their words. She mentored younger students, teaching them to keep their receipts, to document everything, to trust in their brilliance even when others did not. The semester ended with a new policy. All academic misconduct allegations required preliminary evidence and a formal review before any public accusation. A mentorship program was piloted, matching underrepresented students with faculty advocates outside their own department. The English department held its first workshop on bias and inclusive pedagogy, led by Dr. Harrison and Dr. Chen, with Aliyah as the keynote speaker. Looking back, Aliyah saw the evidence not just as her defense, but as a tool for transformation. What began as a solitary struggle had become a catalyst for change. She had not chosen this fight, but she had claimed it, shaped it, and in doing so, made space for others. She celebrated her victory quietly, with Denise and Jamal, with her mother on speakerphone, with her mentors and allies. She allowed herself to feel proud, not just for surviving, but for refusing to shrink, for insisting that her voice, her work, her life mattered. And when the next semester began, and the rumors started to fade, and the department slowly adjusted to its new reality, Aliyah Jackson walked into her seminar with her head high and her evidence close at hand, not because she expected another attack, but because she had learned that brilliance was its own best defense. The university's official statement rippled through campus like an earthquake. The words were simple, an exoneration, a quiet commendation, but everyone felt the aftershock. Within hours, every corner of Westfield University buzzed with talk. The English department, once a cloistered and unyielding kingdom, was now the subject of rumor, debate, and scrutiny. Aliyah's phone was flooded with messages, classmates congratulating her, professors cautiously expressing support, undergraduates and even faculty from other departments reaching out to share their own stories of suspicion, of feeling like imposters. She felt herself balancing on a razor's edge between gratitude and exhaustion. For every message that made her smile, another made her weep, for herself, for all the voices that had never been heard. That week, the English department was a building under siege, though the war was waged in whispers, glances, and emails, not open conflict. Some faculty, especially the younger lecturers and adjuncts, sent notes of quiet support to Aliyah, short, careful messages. "You handled yourself with such dignity," or "Thank you for showing us what real scholarship looks like." Others kept their distance, wary, unsure if the wind was shifting for or against them. But some, Mitchell, Stevens, Hayes, doubled down. They spoke in coded language about standards, about the importance of process. At department meetings, they argued for tighter controls, more oversight, as if the real danger was that a student had slipped through unchecked. For them, the idea that brilliance could come from an unexpected place was not a cause for celebration, but a threat. The departmental reckoning came not as a single event, but as a series of moments, some public, most private, all irrevocable. The first came at the emergency faculty meeting called by Dr. Harrison and attended by every tenured and tenure-track member of the department. The atmosphere was tense, brittle, charged with unspoken grievances. Dr. Harrison, poised and unflinching, opened the meeting by reading the findings of the review panel. Ms. Jackson's scholarship is not only beyond reproach, but an example of the excellence this university claims to value. The process by which she was accused, however, fell far short of our standards for fairness, transparency, and equity. This is not just a departmental issue, it is a university issue, and we will address it as such. She went on to outline the proposed reforms: evidence before accusation, formal reviews with outside faculty, mentorship and bias training, a public commitment to diversity and inclusion. Each point was met with a range of reactions. Some faculty nodded, others crossed their arms, a few exchanged worried looks. Mitchell tried to defend himself. "My concern was always the integrity of the department. When a paper shows such a leap in quality, we must ask questions. Dr. Harrison didn't flinch. Integrity means questioning our own biases as much as others' work. You made an accusation based on expectation, not evidence. That cannot happen again. Rebecca Stevens, perhaps sensing the shifting tide, spoke up. We must admit that our process failed, not just in this case, but in others. I move that we adopt the proposed reforms immediately. Hayes grumbled about academic freedom, but his words landed with little force. The faculty voted overwhelmingly to implement the reforms. After the meeting, faculty gathered in small knots in the hallway, voices low, faces tense. For some, the changes were long overdue. For others, it was the end of an era, the collapse of the old order. For Aaliyah, the day was a blur of relief, anger, and something else, responsibility. She had become, almost against her will, a catalyst. Students stopped her on the quad to thank her, to share their stories, to ask for advice. She was invited to speak at forums, to serve on panels, to advise on policy. It was exhilarating and terrifying. I never wanted to be a symbol, she confessed to Denise one night over takeout. I just wanted to do my work. Denise smiled, warm and weary. Symbols don't get to choose themselves, but you get to decide what to do with it now. The most dramatic reckoning came for the faculty at the center of the storm. Mitchell was summoned to a meeting with Dr. Harrison and the university's provost. He was placed on academic probation, required to attend 40 hours of bias and pedagogy training before he could teach graduate seminars again. The news leaked quickly, spreading across campus. Some faculty defended him. A good scholar, maybe just too old school. Others were blunt. He had it coming. Mitchell, for his part, withdrew from public life. He stopped attending department events, handed off his undergraduate survey course to a TA, and spent his days in his office, door closed. Rumor had it he was considering early retirement, but nothing was confirmed. Aaliyah felt a complicated mix of triumph and sorrow. She had never wanted to ruin anyone's career, but she understood too well that systemic change required accountability. Rebecca Stevens was stripped of her position as department chair and required to complete additional leadership training. For weeks, she avoided Aaliyah's gaze, rarely speaking except when absolutely necessary. But something shifted after she attended the first inclusion workshop. One day, as Aaliyah was leaving her office, Stevens appeared in the doorway, uncertain and pale. "Ms. Jackson," she began, "I owe you an apology. Not just for what happened, but for all the times I let bias guide my decisions, even when I didn't see it in myself. I'm sorry." Aaliyah was silent for a moment. She had imagined this apology in 100 different ways, some angry, some triumphant. Now, faced with it, she simply nodded. "Thank you, Dr. Stevens. I hope you'll use your influence to make things better for those who come after me." Stevens nodded, a little relieved. "I intend to." Christopher Hayes, however, faced a steeper fall. During the investigation, it emerged that he had a pattern of dismissive, sometimes hostile comments toward students of color, comments that had gone unreported or unaddressed for years. Former students came forward, their stories echoing Aaliyah's, being told they didn't sound academic, that their life experience wasn't scholarship, that community college is for people who can't hack it here. Hayes was given the choice: attend a series of intensive workshops, submit to faculty peer review, and issue a public apology, or resign his post. He chose the former, but his authority was badly undermined. Students avoided his classes, his allies on the faculty became scarce. The department, once proud and insular, was forced to reckon with itself. For every open-minded professor willing to embrace reform, there was another who clung to the old order, grumbling about changing standards and political correctness. Department meetings became battlegrounds, one side arguing for progress, the other for tradition. But the students were watching, and they were no longer silent. The Black Graduate Student Association grew in numbers and visibility. the Latinx Student Collective issued its own statement, linking Aaliyah's case to others across campus. A group of white students formed an ally network, pledging to challenge bias wherever they saw it. Social media kept the spotlight burning. News of the incident spread to other universities, where students and faculty debated its implications. Alumni wrote letters to the administration, some outraged, some proud. National publications picked up the story, using it as a lens through which to examine the ongoing struggle for equity in academia. For Aaliyah, the attention was both a blessing and a burden. Reporters called asking for interviews. Organizations invited her to speak at conferences. She was offered a spot on the editorial board of the Journal of Victorian Studies, the very publication that had validated her work. Some nights it was all too much. She called her mother, confessing her fears. "I'm tired, Mom. I feel like I'm carrying the weight of everyone's expectations." Her mother, ever the anchor, replied, "You're not carrying it alone, baby. Every time you make space, you make it easier for the next one. You're not just fighting for yourself, you're changing the world." Aaliyah clung to that, especially on the hard days. The new mentorship program proposed by Dr. Harrison and designed with input from Aaliyah, Denise, Jamal, and other student leaders launched the following semester. It paired graduate students from underrepresented backgrounds with faculty and alumni mentors, people who understood not just the rigors of scholarship, but the subtle, exhausting battles that came with it. The program provided funding for conference travel, stipends for research, and a safe space to share struggles and victories. Aaliyah was asked to co-lead the program. At first she hesitated. Was she ready to be a mentor, to guide others through the fires she had only just survived? But Denise talked her into it. "You already did it for me," she said. "Now you get to do it for more of us." The first cohort included students from every corner of the university: Black, Latinx, Asian American, first-gen, queer, disabled. At the first meeting, they shared their stories of being underestimated, of carrying family hopes, of feeling isolated. Aaliyah listened, sometimes moved to tears, and realized she was no longer alone. Dr. Harrison, for her part, was promoted to provost. Her decisive handling of the incident, her clear-eyed leadership, and her willingness to push for real reform won her respect across campus. She continued to champion diversity and equity, making Aaliyah's case a touchstone for broader change. The English department, still reeling, slowly began to change. New faculty were hired, scholars whose research interrogated not just literature but power, voice, and inclusion. Courses were revised to include more diverse authors. Students were encouraged to bring their whole selves to the seminar room. Some resisted. There were those who clung to the idea that excellence could only look one way, sound one way, come from one place. But their influence waned as the department embraced a new ethos: curiosity over suspicion, support over gatekeeping. Through it all, Aaliyah kept writing. She finished her next article, a bold examination of Black women's erasure in Victorian studies, presented it at the London conference, and received a standing ovation. She started work on her first book, drawing on her own story and those of others to explore what it means to be brilliant in a world determined to doubt you. Her relationship with the department shifted, too. She was invited to serve on search committees, to guest lecture in undergraduate classes, to mentor first-year graduate students. Some of her former critics, chastened by the fallout, treated her with new respect. Others kept their distance, unwilling or unable to admit they'd been wrong. Aaliyah learned to accept both. She was not responsible for their journey, only her own. As the academic year drew to a close, the university held its annual awards ceremony. Aaliyah, nominated by her peers, received the Excellence in Graduate Scholarship Award. The room rose to its feet as Dr. Harrison presented her with the plaque. In her acceptance speech, Aaliyah stood before faculty, students, and administrators, her mother in the front row, beaming with pride, and spoke not of her struggles, but of her hopes. "I stand here because so many people believed in me when it was hard to believe in myself. Because my mother told me my words mattered, because my friends fought for me, because this community found the courage to change. Excellence has no single face. It speaks in many voices. Our job, as scholars, as teachers, as students, is to listen to all of them. The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing through the auditorium, spilling into the hallways, out into the spring night. A few weeks later, on the last day of the semester, Aaliyah walked the campus alone, letting herself remember everything: the fear, the fight, the victory, and the pain. She paused beneath the old oaks outside the English building, feeling the sun warm on her face. She was not the same person who had walked into that seminar room months ago. She was stronger, scarred but healed, hopeful and resolved. She had survived the reckoning. More than that, she had helped to shape it. As she prepared to leave campus for the summer, she found a note in her mailbox, a simple handwritten card from an anonymous student. "Thank you. Because of you, I don't have to hide how smart I am. Because of you, I believe I belong here too." Aaliyah smiled, folded the card, and tucked it into her wallet, another receipt, this one for her heart. She knew the struggle was not over. There would always be those who doubted, those who resisted change, those who saw difference as danger. But now she also knew she was not alone. She had evidence, yes, but more than that, she had community, purpose, and a vision of what the university could become. And that finally was enough. In the months after the storm, Aaliyah Jackson's life moved at a speed that sometimes left her breathless. The chaos of accusation and vindication, the fatigue of leadership and advocacy, and the emotional swings of trauma and triumph, all of it left a permanent mark. But what emerged, steadily and unmistakably, was a new world, a department, a university, and an academic field that would never again be quite the same. The summer that followed was meant to be a pause, a chance for Aaliyah to rest. But rest did not come easy. Her inbox overflowed with speaking invitations, media requests, and messages from students around the country. She declined most. She needed to catch her breath, but a few she accepted. Each time her story was the same: how she had been doubted, how she defended her work, and how the fight was never just for herself. She spent long mornings in her apartment revising her book manuscript. In the afternoon, she met with the first cohort of the university's new mentorship program. They gathered in a circle, some shy, some outspoken, all nervous. Aaliyah listened as they introduced themselves, students from all backgrounds, united by the invisible threads of ambition and vulnerability. One, a transfer from Detroit, confessed, "I almost didn't apply here. I figured there wouldn't be space for someone like me." Another, the first in her family to attend college, admitted, "Sometimes I feel like I'm always auditioning, trying to prove I belong." Aaliyah nodded, recognizing every word, every anxiety. She spoke quietly. "You do belong. Not because you convinced anyone, not because you jumped through extra hoops. You belong because you are here, and your work matters. Never let anyone make you small." She guided them through strategies she'd honed in her hardest years: how to document your process, how to find safe allies, how to recognize microaggressions for what they were, failures of imagination, not failures of self. They shared tips on mental health, on seeking therapy, on celebrating small wins. They laughed, cried, and made plans to meet outside of the official sessions, forging a bond Aaliyah knew would outlast any single semester. The university's administration, meanwhile, pressed ahead with reforms. A new permanent oversight committee was established, including faculty, students, and community members. Its mandate was broad, reviewing every accusation, publishing regular reports, and ensuring transparency. Workshops on anti-bias, trauma-informed pedagogy, and inclusive mentorship were now required for all faculty, not just the ones caught in scandal. Every new policy bore the fingerprints of Aaliyah's experience, and those of the students who came before her, unheard but never truly silent. News of the changes at Westfield spread. Other universities reached out to learn from their process. Some even hired Dr. Harrison as a consultant. Departments across the country re-examined their own practices. At national conferences, the phrase "the Westfield model" began to circulate among scholars who wanted to ensure academic integrity and inclusion could coexist. The Journal of Victorian Studies dedicated an entire issue to new voices in the field, with Alia's article leading off and her keynote address reprinted in full. Letters poured in from around the world, from undergraduates in Nigeria, from doctoral students in India, from professors in London and Toronto, thanking her for breaking barriers, for insisting that voice and brilliance were not bound by race, origin, or privilege. At the London conference, Alia's presentation electrified the room. She spoke not only of Bronte and voice, but of the voices that had been systematically muted in academia: women, people of color, working-class scholars, queer and disabled thinkers. She challenged her field to confront its blind spots. "If the canon is a mirror," she said, "it has been cracked for too long. It's time to see who has been left out of the reflection." After her talk, scholars queued to meet her. Some asked to collaborate, others just wanted to say thank you, to confess that her story had given them courage to speak up, to push back against doubt in their own institutions. She built a network: peers, mentors, students committed to transforming Victorian studies and the academy more broadly. Together they launched a new project, Voices Unbound, an online journal for marginalized scholars to share research, memoir, and creative work. Submissions poured in: essays about labor and class in Dickens, creative nonfiction on Black womanhood and the English novel, poems responding to the silence of the archive. Within a year, Voices Unbound was cited by major journals and included on university syllabi. Its first editorial board, composed largely of women and scholars of color, became a training ground for a new generation of academic leaders. For all the public victories, there were private costs. Alia sometimes felt worn to the bone by the expectations, by the endless explaining, by the weight of other people's hopes. She found herself unable to sleep some nights, mind replaying the worst moments of her ordeal, her body tensed for an attack that was no longer coming. Therapy helped, slowly. Her therapist, a Black woman familiar with the wounds of academic spaces, encouraged her to draw boundaries, to say no, to remember that survival was enough. "You are not a movement," she reminded Alia. "You are a person. You get to rest." Alia's mother visited often, bringing food, warmth, and fierce pride. They spent afternoons walking the city, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes her mother would stop, look at her and say, "You know, baby, you're making history. Don't forget to enjoy your life while you're doing it." Her friendships, too, deepened and changed. Denise became her closest confidant, sometimes challenging her, sometimes just making her laugh. Jamal and Marcus launched their own podcast, Black in the Stacks, interviewing scholars of color about their journeys. They dedicated the first episode to Alia, calling her "the reason we stopped asking for permission to belong." The department, though changed, was not utopia. Some faculty still grumbled in private, some students eyed her with envy or suspicion. But the balance had shifted. There was space for dissent now, space for conversation. The culture of silence had been broken. Outside of work, Alia's life slowly filled with joy again. She met someone, a new professor in sociology, Lena Ruiz, who challenged her, supported her, and helped her rediscover the parts of herself untouched by the academy's harshest lessons. They spent weekends exploring museums, reading poetry, and cooking elaborate meals. Alia's mother loved Lena immediately, teasing her about her bookworm ways. For the first time in years, Alia felt grounded, loved for herself, not just her accomplishments. As the next academic year began, Alia was awarded a fellowship to finish her book. The advance allowed her to move to a sunlit apartment overlooking the city park, a space for writing, dreaming, and building a life beyond the university. She started teaching again, leading a new seminar titled Silenced Voices, Living Texts. Her students, more diverse than ever, filled the room with stories, ideas, and questions that pushed the boundaries of the syllabus. Aaliyah watched them grow in confidence, guiding them through the same storms she had weathered. When a first-year student confessed, "Sometimes I'm afraid my voice doesn't matter," Aaliyah replied, "I once felt that way too, but you have a right to your story and to your scholarship. Never shrink to fit someone else's imagination." The mentorship program flourished. Within 2 years, it expanded to the entire university and inspired similar initiatives at dozens of other institutions. Participants published papers, won grants, and, most importantly, built a sense of community. No longer isolated, they drew strength from each other, from Aaliyah, and from the legacy she had created. The reforms at Westfield, once controversial, became embedded in the university's DNA. New faculty arrived with an expectation of equity. Old hierarchies crumbled, rebuilt around transparency and support. The administration issued an annual State of Inclusion report tracking progress, holding itself publicly accountable. The university invited Aaliyah to give the keynote at graduation. She spoke to an auditorium filled with families, students, and faculty, many of whom had once doubted her, now rising to their feet as she took the stage. Her speech was a testament to the work, the pain, the joy. We are the stories that have not yet been told. We are the evidence that brilliance cannot be contained by expectation. Today, as you walk across this stage, remember, your excellence is not a gift for someone else to recognize. It is a fact and a fire. Let it light your path and the paths of those who come after. After the ceremony, students and parents lined up to thank her, to share their own battles. A shy girl pressed a letter into her hand. Later, Aaliyah read it at home. "Because of you, I spoke up in class. Because of you, I stayed after being told I didn't belong. I'm not scared anymore. Thank you." Aaliyah cried then, not from pain, but from release. 5 years after the incident, Aaliyah was awarded tenure, the first black woman in Westfield's English department to do so. Her book, Unbound Voices, Margins, Canons, and the Power of Refusal, was hailed as a field-defining work. It won the National Book Critics Circle Award and was adopted in graduate seminars across the country. The mentorship program's alumni went on to become professors, authors, journalists, and activists. Some stayed at Westfield, others scattered across the globe. Each carried with them the lessons of that first circle. Document your brilliance, claim your space, support each other. At her tenure lecture, Aaliyah stood in front of a packed hall, students, colleagues, her mother, Lena, Denise, Jamal, Marcus. The topic was, "Excellence has no single face." She traced the story from her own beginnings, through the confrontation that had changed her life, to the web of relationships and reforms that grew from one refusal to shrink. She ended with a challenge. "For too long we have asked, who belongs here? Who gets to be brilliant?" The answer is simple. Anyone who dares. Anyone who cares enough to create, to question, to endure. If you find yourself doubted, remember, brilliance is its own evidence. Let your work speak, and let your presence remake the world. The applause lasted so long that she lost track of time. Aaliyah spent the rest of her career building, teaching, mentoring. She published 3 more books, each one pushing the boundaries of literary scholarship, each one making space for voices previously left in the margins. She founded a foundation for underrepresented scholars. She spoke at hundreds of universities. She never forgot the lesson she learned that first day. Keep your receipts, keep your allies close, and never apologize for excellence. And she never stopped listening to students, to colleagues, to her own doubts and dreams. One spring, a new first-year student at Westfield, shy, brilliant, uncertain, found herself sitting in Aaliyah's office, tears in her eyes. "They say my paper sounds like it was written by someone else," she said quietly. "I don't know how to prove it's mine." Aaliyah smiled, reaching for the folder on her desk. "Let me tell you a story," she said, "and then let's get to work." And so the story continued, not with the triumph of one, but with the courage of many. Not with the defeat of doubt, but with its transformation into a ladder for those who would come after. Aaliyah's name appeared on journal covers, lecture programs, scholarships, and plaques. But more importantly, it appeared in the whispered conversations of students who, facing the wall of doubt, remembered her fight and decided to fight too. Her mother, older but still fierce, kept every program, every article, every letter. On the day Aaliyah was named Distinguished University Professor, her mother stood in the crowd, crying openly. When at last Aaliyah retired, the university held a celebration in the Grand Hall. Former students flew in from all over. A slideshow ran, filled with images of circles of young scholars, of awards, of protests and parties, of Aaliyah at every stage, hopeful, angry, determined, joyful. In her last public remarks, she said, "I wanted to be a scholar, but I became a witness to what happens when people are brave together. I became a builder of bridges I never crossed myself. And every time I saw a student's eyes light up, every time I saw someone refuse to shrink, I remembered, change is slow, but it is sure." The room stood not in formality, but in love. Even after retirement, Aaliyah continued to write, to mentor, to advocate. She traveled, speaking in small towns and big cities, always reminding her audiences that their voices mattered. She started a podcast with Lena, interviewing writers and scholars about resilience and hope. On the anniversary of her confrontation, Westfield University unveiled a scholarship in her name, the Aaliyah Jackson Award for Scholarly Brilliance. Its recipients came from every walk of life. Each year they gathered for dinner with Aaliyah, sharing stories and advice. In her last years, Aaliyah saw the effects of her labor ripple outward. Students unafraid to speak, professors unafraid to listen, a field forever altered by the simple insistence that excellence could be found in every face, every story, every life. And as she looked out on her world, messy, unfinished, better, she was at peace. The story ended not with a final word, but with an open door.